Thanks very much, Laura, and welcome. And just to reiterate, that'd be wonderful as we go along. If you've got questions to please pop them in the chat, and then we might invite you to, if you're comfortable, to ask them to our panellists. For those of you who have participated before, you'll sort of be aware that very much our hope is that this is a conversational space, a space that's a helpful resource for you as teachers. I might begin, Elizabeth, just asking you, what's drawn you personally to work in this area of ecology and particularly engaging this space in Catholic schools? What drew you into that work?
Thanks, Julian, and it's lovely to be with everyone here today. And it's a privilege to be asked to speak about this, and some of you probably can speak even more than I can about it. But I think what drew me in originally, I grew up in I was very blessed to have a family that loved nature. My dad was president of the Field Naturalist Society. My mum was a scouting leader and brownies and guides and cubs and all of that. She loved going outside. And actually today, I'll talk about this later, I've been part of the Catholic Earthcare Youth Summit here in New South Wales, and it was all about citizen science. And I thought, well, we did that growing up. We would always go out into bits of native bushland and try and find rare orchids and things like that. My dad discovered a little pygmy fish species. And but having grown up in that environment, I didn't appreciate it at all at the time. I was such an indoors person. I loved reading. Mum and Dad would say, at least go and read up in a tree, please go outside. So I probably now look back and go, oh, what a blessed childhood to have. But I think I probably put the care of our planet, care of creation on one side, and I put my faith on another side also growing up, because I think we had a very strong faith life and we were very involved with our local church, but I didn't really see them as connected until later on in life. And I think our church also has been really developing that awareness. So we had things like Captain Planet on TV, which was fantastic. I don't know if anyone was in that era to watch Captain Planet, but Widget the World Watcher and things like that. So we had this great awareness growing at school and in the culture around us about the need to protect our planet. And then in the church, that was also slowly starting to be spoken about more, and really going back to some of our roots and some of the people in the past have made that connection so strong. But in terms of schools, I think I've been very inspired by students, and I think back particularly at one stage to attending one of the school strikes for climate in Sydney with some school students. They were so articulate and so knowledgeable about these fields and ecology and what we needed to do and what they need personally to do to change. And that's really, really spurred me on, as well as working with some of our students at my school at present. And I think this is a wonderful way we can also strengthen each other in our faith life, because this is something that maybe society has gone before the church in, and now the church is catching up a bit. But at the same time, we have something really to contribute to that as well. So it really helps strengthen those relationships in both ways. Thanks.
Elizabeth. Alice, for you, Laura mentioned that you're a teacher and that you're involved in workshops spreading the Laudato Si message. What's got you involved and passionate about that work?
Started in quite a strange way, really. I was living 4.5 hours north of Brisbane. My husband and I decided to move to a town called Maryborough, which is close to Hervey Bay. And when we moved up there, I just finished my teaching degree, and I was the only young teacher on staff. Like, I was the youngest that was there. And I wanted really badly to continue my faith up there, as you do when you move to a new place. Well, for me, the first place I went to was the church, to try and find, the people who I knew I would feel comfortable with. And to my surprise, there sort of really wasn't many staff that were attending the local church, the local Catholic church from the Catholic school. And even less of them were within the age bracket of, 21 to 25 type thing, which is where I was at. So I found it very difficult to engage in my faith in this new environment where I was, adjusting to a new job. And I had during the early part of 2018, I was sort of having this crisis of like, why am I up here? What am I doing in this place where there's no one here that I feel like I can connect with, especially because where I'd come from in Brisbane, I was at a church where there was a lot of young people. It was very multicultural. It was a very different environment. And I was sort of praying to God one day on the way home from Mass, and I sort of said to him, what do I do? What do I do with this? How do I connect with you more in this place where I feel like I have no connection? And he said, you know what, now is the best sort of time to continue to engage with Laudato Si, because I'd read Laudato Si in 2015 when it had come out, and I sort of didn't know what it meant or what it could mean as an expression of faith. And God said to me, give up your bin for Lent. I said, well, hang on a minute, that's a bit challenging. What are you talking about there? And he said, no, you've started to look into how you can live out an ecological expression of faith. Like how does that work? And he just sort of directed me to becoming zero waste. So over 40 days, my husband and I, we sat down and we wrote 40 things to change during that time, but it very quickly became over 100. And from that experience, I was very quickly, like working in a school, I was quickly able to see the connection between how schools could allow students to understand that connection between their faith and ecological stewardship through different programs, so like Catholic Earthcare and all that sort of stuff. So taking action and all of those sorts of things. And that's how it sort of got started. And I started to reflect on my experiences a lot. I was posting a lot on social media, and a few people had sort of contacted me and said, hey, can you come and talk to our students about this? Or can you come and talk to our staff about something that you're doing up there? So that it sort of snowballed, and I started Overturn the Tables as a result of that. So yeah, I suppose that was how it all came together way back in the beginning. So yeah.
Thanks, Alice. Some similar kind of themes there. Elizabeth, you've both talked about that connection between, or finding the connection between faith and ecology, and them leading into each other. And Elizabeth, you sort of mentioned something about coming back to our roots in terms of, discovering a wisdom that's been there in the Catholic tradition, as well as many others. Pope Francis kind of picks something of this up by talking about integral ecology. There's a sort of a depth to the way he talks about what's going on in Laudato Si. I wonder if you could explain, maybe Elizabeth first, and then Alice will get you to jump in, what that term means to you, and how it might shape a philosophy of how Catholic schools engage with ecological issues.
Thanks, Julian. I think the whole idea of integral ecology is a very holistic understanding of how we view the world, I guess, what lens or what glasses we put on when we view the world, and particularly when we view the world with the eyes of God, who is caring for the ones who are most vulnerable, the most suffering, the weakest. And it's looking at all of God's creation in that. And that includes all plants, all animals, all mountain ranges, all humans. And it really includes the lens of what would Jesus do in this situation? How would Jesus see this suffering? And how would we see Jesus in that suffering? He said, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to myself. And I think that has some lessons for all of us. And I think it has some lessons for the environmental movement, and it has some lessons for the church as well. And an example of this, I was in Port Augusta for 6 years in the north of South Australia. Wonderful community where the desert met the sea. And we had 2 big coal power stations when I was there. When I moved there, that was the main industry in the town. And the people that lived there, and sisters that I had been living there for some years, had been really affected by it. And our local mayor was very stridently talking about that, because her husband had died. People had had really bad health effects. It had been cleaned up over time and improved, but there was ongoing effects of having those coal power stations. So it was affecting the people as well as the land, of course. The Aboriginal people talked about, this is not what we understood spiritually is able to be taken from the ground. We're not able to take these. We can use the sun's power, we can use the wind's power, but this is not what we were considered energy source. So a whole lot of dimensions there were affected. And then the integral ecology take on it was looking at, well, how can we improve that? And we had a big campaign in the town about Repower Port Augusta, and that was transitioning to renewable power, and now it's a renewable power hub. And talking to the people back there recently, say how good it's been for the town. So it's not just good for the planet, it's good for the people. And everyone feels that they've participated in that, because it was really a community move for that change to happen from one to the other. So that's where I see a sort of a real example of integral ecology in action.
Alice, to you, this idea of integral ecology, how can it shape what happens in schools, and in particular in Catholic schools, in terms of a way of using that or having a lens, as Elizabeth said, into this issue?
Yeah, lens is a really good word. I really like that. I think one of the things that I talk about when I'm discussing with schools, in my experience, when I sort of had what I call my ecological conversion in 2018, my thinking changed. And this is a thing that sort of has to happen. And people who live out an integral ecology or have an ecological conversion, like Pope Francis says, in my understanding, if you have an ecological conversion, you are living an integral ecology, and you understand deeply how everything is so connected. And for me, that thinking was, in my mind, whenever I see something now, I look at, where does something come from? Where does it originate from? What's it made of? Who made it? All that sort of thing. What is it being used for? Or what's its purpose? What's its reason for being? And then where is it going to end its life? So where's it going to go? And understanding that flow for everything helps me to see that everything is connected. I think, though, in the context of Catholic schools, we also need to have, as well as starting to move towards this integral ecology and deeply having that understanding of connection, we need to have integrity. That to me is really, really important, and something that I think, I know definitely in my system up here in Brisbane, that's something that I'm trying to, encourage people to work towards. When I'm teaching Year 9 science, and I'm teaching them about solar energy and how it works, and how, photons come in and it bumps an electron off here, and like all this stuff, the whole process. How can I be teaching that? What's the point of learning that topic if I don't have the solar panels on my roof? There's no integrity there, if that's the case. How can I be in my Year 10 religion class talking about social justice if I don't actually know for my school? I haven't had the chance to find out yet, because I'm only new here. But if the uniforms that my students are wearing have come from a source where people are being paid less than a minimum wage, or they've got terrible working conditions, how can I say that I'm doing social justice? What's the point of that lesson? If they've got that happening. So I think integrity needs to become part of our discussion around that integral ecology for it to really take hold in our Catholic schools.
So Alice, just to follow on there, what are some examples of where you've seen that integrity or Catholic schools engaging well in this space? And I suppose what are some of the things that you've sort of indicated, some of the things that might be done a little better, but just sort of teasing that out a little bit more. So I suppose a bit of a strengths and weaknesses question for you.
Yeah. I've seen quite a lot of schools on the journey. Elizabeth's probably, worked in lots of schools as well that have been through this. So in the schools where I've seen integral ecology really put into place effectively, or where everyone has that deep connection, is where Laudato Si penetrates at every sort of level of leadership. It penetrates in everyone's mind. So it might be integral to the school's master plan. So they might have one of the schools that I've worked with recently, they know that by 2026 or whatever it is that they're going to be 100% renewable by that point, which is, for them, they know that that's a realistic goal. It's something that they're working very hard towards. And then at the same time, they might have the PNF association, like the parents and friends or, community sort of group attached to the school. They're running something like a Containers for Change pickup, where they're collecting the cash for cans or whatever you call it. And then that money that they're raising is going back into the community somehow, helping, buy uniforms or school supplies for the students who can't afford it, or helping to feed families when they are going through tough times, whatever that might look like. And then also having, students like maybe in a Peter 12 school that have the capacity to pass their uniforms down and all that sort of thing, or PNF funding the gardens, or having gardening as part of their food tech curriculum and all that sort of stuff. So where it's in the minds of teachers and the minds of the parents and the minds of the school leadership, it's obviously going to enter into the minds of the students, and they just become immersed in all of it. They know how to recycle. They know that, handing on their uniforms is helps other people. They know that, solar panels should be our normal, that type of thing. So they, those schools that show that commitment and are working at those levels, I think really are the ones that are leading by example at the moment. So yeah.
Thanks. Elizabeth, to you, similarly, what have you seen in schools in this space that's done well, and maybe where are some of the areas for improvement for Catholic schools engaging in ecology?
Thanks, Alice. It was very inspiring to hear some of the schools that you've been at and heard about. I think we could all learn a lot from that, and we're all on a journey with this. So I think to hear those really ideal situations, sometimes when we think, oh, there's a lot more that we could be doing, we think, well, others have done it and they've gone on the journey and we can go along with them. And, we're all at different places. I have heard recently one of the schools in my old diocese in Port Pirie is it's just started, and so starting at this time they're able to integrate Laudato Si into everything, into the whole planning right from the start, from the very start of the school. So that's very exciting to hear about. I think my school at the moment, we're also on the journey, but I think we're seeing a lot more that we can do. And I think the education aspect of it is really, really important. So having students and staff become more aware of Laudato Si and ecological ethics, and it's in the curriculum in some of the latter grades, but perhaps it's something that hasn't spread as far into, for example, the parent community, the family community, the planning committees of the school. So there's a lot of places, and I think there's also things that we're doing, for example, putting solar panels up, but for everyone to understand why that is and how that fits into, this is part of our faith, this is how we help others. This is how we help those who are more suffering, more vulnerable. And the earth is one of those parts of creation. So yeah, I think we can go a lot further in that. And I think that being faith schools, we have really something to offer in this space, because I think that as Christians, we have this sense of expanding our understanding of who our neighbour is. So we start off with, the person living next door. We hear the Good Samaritan story, and our neighbour is suddenly every person, and especially those who are suffering. And now through Laudato Si, we're really being challenged to look much broader as to our neighbour and our neighbourhood. And just like we care for our own backyard, we care for our whole earth as our common home. So I think having that language to use to describe all these things at faith schools is really important. And it helps when the actions happen, because they happen anyway. Things are changing. We are creating better environments with less waste, for example. We're recycling more, all of those things. But to have the why and the connection with who we are as people, who we are as Catholics, I think that's a really important connection to make.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I'll just take the opportunity to remind those watching on that we're very keen for you to participate in the conversation, and feel very free to put a question in the chat and we'll come to you. So as we're talking along, feel free to stick something in the chat by way of a question. Alice, you mentioned sort of the ways in which I suppose that teaching in the classroom has to be supported by what's going on elsewhere in the school to engage students. It's interesting, this ecological space, because often, particularly senior students in some ways might be way ahead, if you will, of some staff in terms of their consciousness and awareness. Generationally, there is a shift happening. But of course, there's also the apathy of adolescence that we see in a classroom too. How do you engage students who might be from all the way from sort of being really keen to pretty apathetic in a school context? What gets them interested or hooked into this issue?
Yeah, I think it's less about trying to spark engagement and passion. I think that's important. Don't get me wrong. I think having especially a core group of students that's really dedicated, that wants to bring about the change. I think that schools need that, but it needs to become routine. It needs to just become part of the everyday, so that the students who are apathetic in terms of their wanting to be engaged can and will actually be engaged just by what they do normally. So when they go to the bin, or when they turn off the lights, or when they when they're making their lunches for the day, maybe their meat-free Mondays is just normal for them, that type of stuff. Like you said, the students already know this. They get it. And to a point, in some ways, where some students are becoming desensitized to the noise around what's happening, because they feel in some ways that they can't, or they aren't capable of being able to make some sort of changes. But if we're able to facilitate that as much as possible, they hopefully won't feel as desensitized, and know that their actions are not only part of a routine. It's not for, it's about the purpose, it's about caring for creation, and also hopefully those actions will allow them to understand that what they are doing is not just about our animals and our plants and our lands and all that sort of stuff. It's also about God, and it's about Him, and caring for the creation that He made. And hopefully eventually that starts to build their spirituality as well, and they can see God in all places, just as as we do. So that's part of, I suppose, how we can try and facilitate not only the ecological formation, but also the faith formation. I think for teachers that wanting to facilitate that, but maybe don't have the support or something like that. It's all about leading by example. You know, there's so many things that we can do, so many small things that we can do to be able to help that transition going forward and facilitate that drive for students for them to start that journey. So if you're one of those teachers who's sitting in the school going, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to start, but I want to, just be the one to start it. Just start doing one thing, and you know it will start to snowball from there. Yeah.
Julian, can I jump in there?
Please.
Thanks, Alice. That just sparked something for me that I heard recently. I watched a presentation from the National Church Life Survey, and they survey a whole group of people, not necessarily connected at all with faith or church. And what they found was the number one way of people connecting with however they put it, God or faith or higher power, was nature. Being in nature was the number one. Second was music, listening to inspiring music, things like that. And that's really entry points for people today. So that's really entry points for talking about faith, or not necessarily talking, but experiencing spirituality, connection to God. And I think the music one's really important as well. And especially having stupid little ditties and things like that works really well because we remember them. So having kids getting up and performing some fun little song, something like that, is a great way of getting it into our brainwaves. And as you say, there might be children who are not engaged, but they remember that song, or they remember that stunt that was pulled, that kind of thing.
Can I just to, I'm intrigued, I suppose, by the way in which engaging in the area of, or just having the experience, as you say, Elizabeth, of engaging in nature, the experience of, and then some of the consciousness around ecology leads to an awareness of God, or can do. How do you kind of prompt that connection for students where, in a kind of pretty secular materialist culture, the easy thing to say is, well, we're doing this for the environment, and that's where it stops. It stops at a material kind of level response.
I was recently at a Maris Mission Forum in Mittagong, and the very first prayer it was for Year 12 students, and they were a very highly engaged group of students. It was wonderful to be part of it. The very first prayer they used was kind of we all say a prayer together, and I thought, oh, is this the kind of prayer we're going to be using over the weekend? But that was the only prayer we had like that the whole weekend. They found different ways of praying and different ways of experiencing connection with God. And on the final day, we used an introduction around Andiri, which is the Miriam Rose Ungama Bauman, who was the Senior Australian of the Year. She's really brought that to consciousness in Australia. And I think a lot of people now connect with our Aboriginal spirituality in one way or another. And even if they don't feel they connect to the Christian or Catholic faith, they connect with that, even the appreciation of acknowledgements and welcomes of country. And they're really moments. And what we did, we had a little introduction by her, and she explicitly does connect it with faith, but really out of an Aboriginal spirituality perspective. And then we went and just sat for, was at least 5 minutes under a tree, somewhere touching the ground. And it was a wet day. It was probably, people got a bit muddy, but it was just amazing. And they really, really appreciated and got something out of that. And they might not have been comfortable sometimes with the words God, with the words Jesus, but that was a really way into it. But it was also a way of saying, this is part of our faith story, and our faith story encompasses all of that. And our faith story encompasses meditation, connection with our earth. So that was just one way in.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm keen to just come to a couple of the questions that have popped up on the chat. So, Michael, if you can unmute Hugh, just so we get a sense of his context. Hugh's asked a question about creating a green team.
Oh, hello.
G'day.
Yes. So I'm been given the role of sustainability liaison this year. So it's something new at our school. We haven't delved into sustainable thinking or taking any kind of action really in this area. So I've gotten a little bit of interest from some students, but there isn't a huge amount of drive from them. And I'm just trying to think of ways that, actions we could take, really try and get them involved. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on getting students involved in maybe decision making or any sort of actions, awareness raising, anything like that. Or if it's is it more like something, do we have to go to the classroom first and then, garner the interest through the curriculum and then look at something like a student action group?
I'm happy to take that one if that's okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think the classroom is a good way to start, but probably not necessary if we've already got students who've already expressed interest, because they clearly want to do something. But normally the students, in my experience, they tend to lead this space anyway. So it's about getting them together to be able to discuss and having, maybe they have a goal in mind that they want to work towards, or maybe it's just they want to engage themselves. Maybe they just want to participate in something like Clean Up Australia Day. It could just be that. I think there's sort of different levels, I suppose, of engagement that we could talk about. There's the kind of what some people call the tokenistic type actions, where it's you celebrate Earth Hour or something like that, where it's 1 hour where everyone turns their lights off or something like that, which, don't get me wrong, is a great thing to do, but it doesn't necessarily lead straight away to an enormous amount of action. But those sorts of activities at first bring about a lot of success, and it gives students the drive to be able to continue, because they go, oh, we did that one thing, let's do another thing. So yeah, it's about just igniting that little bit of passion first, and maybe you only do one thing before the end of the year, and then next year you do 2 things, and the year after you do 3 things, or whatever it is. So I think the starting point would be to just ask them what they want.
Thank you.
I might just add as well, thanks, Alice. Alice has probably got a much broader experience of this, but just in my own school, I can really understand where you're coming from. Sorry, I don't have your name, but in starting from scratch and starting in a place where this hasn't been part of the conversation at all in a school. So yes, when not at all, but not from a leadership level and not from a student level. So when I started in my school, there was certainly a lot of staff that were very interested in this, but I didn't hear it from the students. And we got one student involved in a Catholic Earthcare event. This is 2 years ago. And she was saying, I feel like I'm the only one. I feel like none of my friends believe in climate change. So I was so proud of her. I thought, good on her. So she's so brave. Then we got a second one that year. Last year, we had a group of 5 who went to the Catholic Earthcare Youth Summit. They came away so enthused and so passionate about it. And today we had 11, and 12. One would have come but was sick. So we had 12. So it's slowly building that up. And then when it's coming from them, because we were bringing things into the curriculum and staff are saying, I'm teaching this. This is happening. We're learning about it. But it was when it starts coming from the students, and when they sometimes have an experience, like we've been fortunate to be part of Catholic Earthcare events, but they hear from other students what's going on in other schools and they pick it up. So it starts and it builds, but when it's coming from the students rather than coming from the curriculum and the staff and us old fuddy-duddies. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Michael, I might just ask you to unmute Bernadette Lynch, just because I think that's an interesting kind of follow-on question. How
Hello, can you hear me?
G'day.
Yeah. Hello, how are you? Bernadette Lynch. I religious education leader here in Ballarat in Victoria, and our school this term has taken on a whole unit on sustainability in the environment, and through RE we're using the lens of Laudato Si, and the children are getting really excited about what they can do in the classroom. But now we're thinking, how do we empower them to take that message home to their parents and get their parents on board and help them to understand the lens that we're seeing it through, not just from sustainability and environment, which are good catchphrases, but to get the Christian message really home to parents.
I'm happy to take that one if you want.
Thanks.
That's a really, really good idea. I like, trying to make that connection to home as well. I know for me, if I was teaching Laudato Si at school in a particular unit for RE, and I knew that we were discussing some of these things with the students, one of my tasks that I would have set myself as a teacher would be to email the parents home and say, this is what we're learning about this unit. You might be able to talk to your students about blah, 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 and spark that conversation at home as well. Because we know that, especially, well, I work in, so the secondary area. So of course, parents and the students tend to not talk to each other when they hit the age of 12 and on. So having anything to talk about at the dinner table is really good. So parents want to be able to engage with the students learning, and that could be one way that they do it. One of the things, I might be able to share this with you in some way. I recently created, as I also work for Catholic Earthcare. I don't know whether Elizabeth knew that, but we've been developing a program for families at Catholic Earthcare, where families can sort of sign up as an Earthcare family and go on a journey in that way. But one of the things I have done, which links to something that Colleen mentioned in the chat, was I made some videos about the Laudato Si goals and how that relates to families as well. So I'm happy to share that with you guys when I have a spare moment. I'll pop it in the chat and stuff. But yeah, that could be, I've just made some sort of short YouTube videos, which could be sent home maybe in a newsletter or something like that. And the parents could learn about what the goals are and learn about Laudato Si as well at the same time. And Pope Francis's message in kind of a 5-minute short video for each thing. So if you want access to that, I'm happy to share with you. But that was just some ideas that I had pop into my head. So yeah.
Thanks, Alice. Elizabeth, I understand that you've had students talking in parishes during Laudato Si week. So just in terms of spreading the message to family, but also to community more broadly, would you tell us a bit about like that experience for students and how they approach kind of sharing in community the messages?
Thanks. So 2 weeks ago in Laudato Si week, I was very fortunate to be asked by a parish to talk about Laudato Si, and it was supposed to happen last year, and of course COVID happened and it got cancelled a few times. But when I was asked, I thought, well, I can talk, but it would be really great to have some students as well. So we had 2 of the 10 students who'd done the Catholic Earthcare Summit last year, and wow, it was inspiring. So I kind of bookended what they talked about and talked about some of the more technical parts of Laudato Si and the theological and spirituality aspects of it. And then they talked really powerfully about real local examples. They showed some great pictures, sort of before and after shots in the drought here and the flooding and storms. And they really brought things to a local level and challenged people at a local level, challenged people about their voting, because that was just before the election. So to consider this, consider us and future generations in your voting. And I think those students, what really impressed me was they spoke their prepared scripts, but then when it came to the questions, that's where they really shone, and they did really well at that. And there was a candidate, a federal candidate attended as well. I think he'd been attending because he'd met one of the students and they'd invited him along, and he wasn't doing it in terms of his campaign. He said he was just there to attend, and they had a great conversation with him afterwards. And I think it was a wonderful experience both ways. I'm not sure if he has a religious background or not at all, but I think to connect in what we were doing at Laudato Si in terms of the environment from a faith perspective, but also for the students to see that political side of things and how they could become more involved and more engaged as well.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I just note Alice has placed in the chat that link that she'd mentioned, so thank you so much for that. Elizabeth, just following on from sharing the message and being in community, Laura mentioned in your introduction that you've been involved in Catholic Earthcare, and I know Alice has just mentioned she has as well, but also in a number of other communities and networks around ecology. Can you tell us about some of those networks and how it's helpful for engaging in a school in this space to have had that experience of those networks?
Thanks, Julian. I've really come through much more community parish backgrounds. I really haven't had as much to do with schools as most of you here have. I'm not a teacher. I did teaching 1 year and it wasn't for me. So I really appreciate teachers now and admire them a lot. So I've really come through working in spaces where you gather people often from different faiths coming together. So ARC was one of the groups, which is the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. And they've really become a very, more politically active and advocating for a lot of things. And they have been a great way to stay in touch of that really significant role that religious leaders have in changing the conversation, because they've had religious leaders outside politicians' offices, they've had them involved with companies that have been involved in fossil fuels and things like that. And, that's one aspect of it. There's many different levels of participation and many different things needed. But then another thing has been living the change. And that's really about people of faith saying, I'm going to change because of my faith. And how about you do it along with me? So it's that personal level. So there's the big picture, there's the political things. There's also the very personal individual changes and the strength that we have in doing that along with others. And I think we know that as Catholics in Lent, for example, and as Alice talked about having that challenge for Lent, I find that, I try and do something for Lent and talking about that, buying only Australian produce during Lent, for example, 100% Australian, or 99, I went down to 99%, but plastic-free July, that's not a religious thing, but, having those things that we challenge each other to do something at a personal level as well as the big picture, because it's that integral sort of stuff. It's not just what other people should do and how other people should change, but it's how we can personally do it. And so I think at schools, they have that opportunity as well. For example, in Lent, we can challenge each other. What commitments can we make? Today at Catholic Earthcare, they had little pledges they made. So having those opportunities for making something definite commitment, what will my role be in it, but also looking at the bigger picture. So I think we can connect with other faiths as well, because it's something that every faith is really talking about creation or all living beings. They use different language, but we can all use that religious commitment idea, because then it becomes an ethical and a moral thing, because we can talk all we like about this should change, but unless it becomes really personally important for us, unless we when there's a real crisis, we realize it is a crisis. When we respond to a war, for example, we all get in and do something. But when it's someone else's problem, we don't. So when it becomes, this is important to us, this is part of it's a moral duty, it's part of our faith, and not just part, it's something significant in how we respond to God's love for us, to share that love with all creation.
I also wonder if you've got anything from your experience of community, ecological community, but maybe also communities where there have been good initiatives around ecology and spirituality that's helped you or nourished you in the work that you then do in schools and education.
Yeah, thanks. It's really funny because Elizabeth's talking about all the initiatives that I've already been been part of at some point. I was helping out ARC at one point. I was helping them originally with Living the Change, and then I moved into helping them with the divestment campaign that they were running. I actually really struggle with the political activism side. That's just not me. I'm not one to stand there with a placard and yell at things. I don't know if I can do that. But of course, working with Catholic Earthcare now as well. But it's funny because I actually think that the Mercy Sisters, which Elizabeth's connected to, I think their spiritual formation has been something that has really inspired me. Sally Neves, I know she does a lot of really great work, and there's lots of really good sort of workshops and webinars and spirituality days that they offer, which I have found really nourishing, especially when things aren't feeling good, when I'm feeling like I need to be doing more, or we're not getting somewhere fast enough, or I need just that little bit of a boost to keep going because I'm finding it really hard. Those sorts of spiritual programs, I think, are really, really essential, and they're not necessarily appropriate for for mass student engagement or anything like that. But for staff, definitely there's something there that can be used. But yeah, otherwise, what Elizabeth mentioned is sort of what I was going to mention too. So yeah.
Great. Just for a final question, Michael, I might ask if you can unmute Colleen Hampton, who asked a question a little while ago, just about Laudato Si and its 7 goals. And I suppose just to finish us, what's challenging about them and what might give you hope about them. We might just wait a moment to see if we can unmute Colleen to put her question.
I think you've pretty much said it in a nutshell, Julian, but it was just because of your passion and your involvement already, ladies, I just thought if you would share with us what you feel is the most challenging of the 7 goals and why you feel that way, please.
Thanks, Colleen. I'm just looking at them here. But yes, I think some of that education side of things is it's a big thing because it's changing. It's like that conversion, as Alice talked about, ecological conversion. It's not just about, I guess, learning concepts, but it's a whole change of being and transformation, and that takes time. Education, spirituality, it's linked into that. We can adopt simple lifestyles, and that can be a challenge, especially in my iPhone, whatever's out of date now, I have to get the newer iPhone, whatever that kind of mentality we live in. But then it's actually going back, as Alice has been talking about, and it becoming part of who we are, to see the world in a different way, to see resources not as resources, but as this is metal, and this is wheat, and this is grapes, and this is and it's come from a farm, and it's come from being nourished by the sun and the soils and the rain. So I think that's the big challenge, yes. And I think the connection, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, I think that's always something we can work on more, because sometimes we can see them in separate categories. And as I was saying, also the environmental movement could learn a lot, I think, from our Catholic perspective in that area.
Yeah, my response was going to be very similar. I think personally, I'm just conscious of time because I think we've only got about 5 minutes left. I think personally for me, I've struggled with the ironically the community engagement and empowerment one. I think just because it has implications around that political side of things, which I was talking about earlier, which I feel a little bit hesitant to engage with. I think for me personally that one, but overall I think the adoption of sustainable lifestyles is probably one of the most challenging. I think there's a few reasons why that's becoming a bit more of a challenge now. the past few months, I don't know whether anyone's seen, but the Regenerating Australia short film has been released by Damon Gameau, who released the 2040 film a few years ago. And he talks about the fact that what we actually need to do as a society now, especially in Australia, is move away from the concept of sustainability and move towards regeneration. And there's a big difference between them. Sustainability is not enough. It would have been enough in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, but it's all about regenerating and fixing up the problems that we made. So I think that the terminology in that is maybe that goal, those goals are meant to be international, but they're not necessarily the best worded, especially in the Australian context, knowing our landscape and what we've done to it. So I think that that's a challenge, but also that particular goal comes out of something that is present in Laudato Si, that there's a priest, his name's Father Jostrom Carithanen, and he writes about virtues within Laudato Si, so ecological virtues. And what that goal is actually implying is that we need to adopt some of those virtues. And the virtues include things like sobriety, so being sober in our lifestyles, and praise, and like praising God and being grateful, and all of those sorts of things, which comes with the adoption of that type of a lifestyle. And that change, and which integrates as well with ecological spirituality and education anyway, that sort of a change is a change of the heart. And sometimes our hearts are the hardest things that we need to change. We can change our minds quite quickly, because learning is something we do every day, but changing our heart takes time. So yeah, very similar, but yeah, that's where I would say is probably the challenge.
Thanks, Alice and Elizabeth. I think there, in hearing from the challenges, we've heard something also of what the hopes are, and there is I think a sense in this space. We've talked about the lens through which we engage this issue, and that ending on that note of what conversion ultimately is, I suppose, is a change of heart, and that being a process that requires community. I hope those who have listened in have felt part of a community trying to work out how we do this and engage, particularly in Catholic schools, in an integral ecology. With a couple of minutes left, I'm going to pass back to Laura just for some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for participating today. A special thank you to Julian, Elizabeth and Alice. I was furiously taking notes there and it was really fantastic. So thank you very much, a very useful conversation.